Hello and welcome back to another episode of Oasys Top Tips. Did you know that you can write your own custom reporter scripts and import them from external files in Oasys Reporter? In the last episode, we looked at library programs built into Reporter and how we can use them to extract useful information from an analysis and its results files. In this episode, I'm going to show you how we can add custom functionality using Reporter scripts. To help us with this, I've come up with a toy example that will hopefully demonstrate some of the functionality of the Reporter API and get you started writing your own Reporter scripts. So if you remember last time, what we did is we extracted various properties from the analysis, including the include files, but unfortunately there are too many include files, so they sort of run off the end of the table and it's hard to see what they all are. If we come up to the variables here and edit, we can see that the includes variable has been created for us, and we've got a parent directory and also all of the includes with this little arrow symbol before them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as an example, and we're going to take this string and generate a table which stores an include on each row of the table. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and to start with, we'll first make a little script item. So we click on the script tool here, and we can just drag anywhere onto the screen, and then let's give it a name. We're going to call it create includes table. And then we also want to be able to run this by clicking on it. So we'll make it a button and we'll just give it the same name here. And then Reporter won't let us save this item until we add something into the script box here. So I'm just going to put a comment, that's the 2 forward slashes in JavaScript, and then just call it placeholder, because what we also have is the option to load in a script from a separate file. I tend to find it's easier to write scripts in a separate file than it is to write them in here, particularly if you're using a text editor like Visual Studio Code or something like that. It gives you nice coloring and it helps just make sure you don't make any mistakes. And now I'm going to switch over to view where we've got the API on the left-hand side, that's within the Reporter manual, and then a blank document here on the right-hand side, which is just in Visual Studio Code, where we're going to write our script to create this includes table. If you're not familiar with it, this on the left-hand side is the Reporter manual, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to Appendix D, and this is where we get the JavaScript API, and then we can use these bookmarks on the left-hand side to help us write our script when it comes to it. But to start with, when I write scripts, I like to sort of plan out what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to write a few comments just to kind of outline where we're going to go with this. So first thing we want to do is we want to get the includes string from the reporter variable. So it's from, I think it was called includes in capital, reporter variable. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to split that into separate includes, into an includes array, and we can use that little arrow symbol to help us split it. I think there was a space after it as well, so we'll use that. And then we want to put the table on a new page, so we'll learn how to do that. Create a new page, and then we'll put a table on that page, so create a table on the new page. And then we need to insert a row for each includes file. And then we might also want to add includes title or something like that. Includes as a title. Okay, so this is where we're going. So the first thing we want to do is get the include string from the includes reporter variable. So we look on the left-hand side here and scroll down, we'll find the variable class, and we see this function get from name. So we'll click on that, and there's a little example here. So I'm just going to copy that in here and paste that there, and then it was includes is the name of our variable that we're looking for. Now this T here tells us is a template, so we need to basically get hold of the template that we're currently looking at. And you'll find that pretty much every script you'll do in Reporter will need a template variable, and there's a pretty useful function called getCurrent, which is just the current template that you're working on. So most scripts I find tend to start with this line here. It's a little bit like in Primer when you do a sort of model.select. So that's a kind of equivalent thing. And then they've called it T, so why not call it T? Because we might use it quite often. It's nice to have a short name for it. So now we've got the variable here, and we want to give this a sensible name. So let's call it includes var, and that kind of means it's a reporter variable. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to actually get the string. So if we went back to the variable class here, and then we can expand and we can see the properties. So here we have properties, and we want to get the value of that variable. So the other things like the name of it and its precision and things like that, we just want the value of that variable. So we're going to create a new variable called var include and then the string, and it's just going to be the name of this and then dot value. Great. So now we have include string. And so next we just want to split that string up. We'll put it into an array. So array of includes, and it's this string here, copy paste. And then we're using JavaScript, and it has a helpful string split function here, which basically enables us to split a string based on some kind of separator. Normally, you'd probably use something like a comma if you were reading in a CSV file, but we have a funny separator here. We've got this arrow and then a space between each of those lines, and that's what we were using. If I just quickly remind you, in Reporter, and we go Variables, Edit, we see that we have these arrow space on each line, and so we want to get hold of all of those. We also want to not use the first thing that split, and that's because the first one isn't actually an include file, it's just the parent directory. So we'll need to be mindful of that. So now what we want to do is create a new page. And so we've got our pages class here, and whenever we want to create a new thing of something, it's called using the constructor. So we can click on the drop down arrow and then click on the constructor. It just so happens it's on the same page here, so we'll just scroll down to where we have an example that we can copy, and we're just going to copy that and paste it in here. And so now we've created a new page, and that page is in the template that's the current one. So we're using that T argument again. And now what we want to do is create a table. So we'll just say var table. Basically everything that goes onto a page is an item. So what we need to do is find the item class here. So we'll click on item, and then we want to find the constructor for that. And so the item constructor is here. And so what we want to do is basically create a new table. So we use the constructor definition here to help us. So we're going to say our table is going to be new, and then it'll be an item. And then we also need to put it on a page. So we've already made the page variable. So it's going to be on page 2. And then type constant. And if we see down here, we've got various types. And what we're going to create is an item table. I'm just going to copy that there and paste that in here. Then the next thing is going to be the name of the table. So we'll just call that includes table. And that is the name that would appear at the top of the item when you click on it in Reporter. And then the other arguments we have here are x and x2, y and y2. And these are optional arguments, so they default to values and can also be overwritten. And so we can see here that x is x coordinate, x2 is the second x coordinate, so if we're finding a rectangle, and then we got y and y2. So we have a couple of options here of how we would define this table, the sort of shape of it. We can either put in all of these parameters, or we can leave it at this point here, and then we can actually access those properties and overwrite them at this point. So table.x equals, and I'll just hold that for now and just put in 0, and then table.y equals 0. And then we also want to get the width. So table.width equals, let's say 10, and table.height equals 8. So these are just placeholders. We're going to overwrite them in a second, but that is one way we can do it, and that sort of saves us writing x2 and y2 because the height will automatically be kind of set and y2 will come from that. So y2 would essentially be the y value plus this height value that we picked. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and I'm going to come back to Reporter, and I'm going to edit the includes table script. So I'm going to load it in and then import, and we've got that here. And you can see it's a lot harder to read in this color here, but it's still the same script. And so now I'm going to click OK, press P. So we're going to run the script by clicking on it, and we can then move to the second page and see we've created our table here, and we can see it's got 0, 0, 10, and 8 there. So that's obviously quite small in the corner, but something else to note is that, so if we move it out, it's a bit easier to see, it's created with 2 rows and 2 columns, and that's the default that happens for tables. I'm just going to show you that in the manual as well. But if we go back to page 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these properties here, 8, 31, 232, and 77. So let's go back to our coding and API manual, and we can read here. It says create a new item, and the name and coordinate arguments are optional. For a table, it's constructed with 2 rows and 2 columns, and if we need just 1 row or column, we need to use the delete row and delete column property. So we'll have to bear that in mind. And then we want to set these. So this was 8, 31, 232, and 77. And so that means that our table is going to match in size and shape the table that we had on the first page. So if we save that and then come back to Reporter, and then we'll double click here and we'll load in our new script. Okay, and then P, and then run it. Now when we go to the next page, we can see our table is the same size on those 2 pages. Okay. So now all we need to do is add the appropriate rows. But before we do that, I'm just going to add in some delete row calls. So we're going to delete the second column and row. To do this, we need to call table.delete row, and then it'll be 0 index, so 1 will be the second column, and then we'll copy that and we'll do delete column. So now we save that and then come back here and do the same process, load it in, our script, OK, P, and then run. If we come here, we'll now see that we've deleted the second row and column, and actually what's happened is that the size of our table is now essentially a quarter because it's just that one cell left behind. So it didn't update the size, it's just left the cells the same and it's deleted the columns in place. So it's good to just bear that in mind for when we think about sizing at the end. So let's come back to our scripts, and now we're going to insert a new row for each element in the array of includes. So for, and then we typically use I for this, I equals, and we're going to actually start with I equals 1 because we don't want that first element, because that first one was actually just the parent directory. So for I equals 1, and then we'll say array of includes I is less than array of includes dot length, and then I plus plus. I'm just going to iterate over all the I's. We need to insert a row. So basically, if we come to the item class here, we can have a look and see all the member functions. And there's one here that says insert row. And what it does is it says insert row that become the second row from the top of the table. So all I need to do is get the table and then go dot insert row. And then actually, if I leave that blank, then it will add it to the bottom of the table, which is what I want. So I want the table to sort of go from top to bottom with those new rows. So for each iteration, I'll add a row. And then what I need to do is I need to basically write into that cell that I've got here. So if I go back to the item here and then go to set cell properties, then this is how I can basically write into a cell. So I'm going to go set cell properties. And what this is expecting is basically a properties object. So if I scroll down here, we can see an example, cell object or properties, cell object, and this will be in the first row and column, so the first cell. Now what I want to happen is I want it to write the text. So I look up here, I can see the various properties in the properties object, and this is just a JavaScript object, so the curly braces. And the first property is going to be called text, and we'll set that text to the array of includes and then the ith element of that, and note that we're starting from the second one because I equals 1. And then we also want to insert it into a particular row. So in this case, we're going to insert it into row I. So the first thing goes in the second row, I equals 1, and that's because the very top cell, we're going to use that for our title. So then I equals 1, and then first column, so that's 0. So if we save that, and then we come back to Reporter, remember to load it again. And now we can see we've actually made a table with all these rows. But if we press P, the table is really tall. It's got a height of 346.5, so let's just change that down to something more reasonable like 80. And there we go, we can see our table. But what actually happened there? So basically when it created new rows or new cells, it was just copying the height component of the previous cell, and so the table was kind of growing in size by the same height as the original cell. So we have a couple of options here. If we go back to our code, we could either change the height here to make the original table smaller. So say we put that as something like 10, then actually confusingly all the elements would have a height of 5, because remember it creates it with 2 rows and columns, so that 10 would be divided by the 2. Or perhaps simpler to follow is if we actually take these width and heights and we put them right at the end, and so that basically resizes or rescales our table at the end so that no matter how many rows or columns it has, it will fit that rectangle. So if we save that, come back to Reporter and go back to that first page, press P and load this in, and then run that. We can have a look. And now we can see our lovely new table here with all of our include files. So then there's just one more thing to do, which is to add the title. So if we go back here and add our title, what we just need to do is we'll copy this line here, set the properties, and this time it's not in the array, we just have the title and we're going to call it includes, and then it will go in the very first cell, so we'll change the I to 0, and we can also choose to add some other properties to our cell properties field. So just picking one here, we've got font style. So if I take font style, and then let's have a look at some of the styles we can use. So these are class constants. We've got Reporter bold, italic, normal, and underlined. So I'm going to go for a nice bold one, copy that in there, save that, and now come back to Reporter and go to the first page, load that in one last time. OK, press P, run that, and now we should have our includes table created. Great. So you may have noticed that because I chose to use an external text editor, we spent quite a lot of time loading that in and saving it, and then loading it and saving it and loading it. And actually there's a new item in Reporter 19 and onwards called the script file item. And basically that allows you to point to a script file rather than having to load the scripts in manually. Now the script file tool is located here, and I could just create it in the same way that I've done before and drag it in. Or what I could do is right click on this and convert into and change this to a script file. And now I just need to choose this once, OK, and then when I run this, it now creates my script just as it did before. But the difference is that this is pointing to a script file rather than having the script text within the item. So just to illustrate this point, what I'm going to do is open up the code here, and I'm just going to add a font style to all of our cells. This time I'm going to go for text italic. I'll save that and then come back to Reporter and run that, and then look at the next page. And now we can see those are all italic and I didn't have to load that in. So I hope you found this a really useful top tip, and we've only just scraped the surface of what we can do, but I wanted to give you an overview of how to write your own scripts in Reporter, as well as show you the usefulness of the script file tool that's new within Reporter 19. And if you want to find out more about how you can write your own JavaScripts, look out for our JavaScript courses that we run on our website. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next Oasys Top Tips.